Hey, and welcome back. And in this lesson, we're going to look at cloth simulations in Blender. So really fun stuff. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to delete everything in our scene. So I'm going to press A on the keyboard to select everything, then X, and then click to delete. So let's add a sphere. So I'm going to do Shift A, Mesh, and then I'm going to add a UV sphere, just like that. And then I want to add a plane as well. So I'm going to do Shift A, Mesh, Plane, and I'm just going to scale that up. So I'm just going to press S on the keyboard and just scale it up like that. And then I'm going to move this plane upwards. So G, Z, and I'm just going to move it to about there. Now I want to apply a cloth simulation to this plane, and let's see what happens. So with this plane selected, I'm going to go over to the physics properties again on the side, so the little circle with a half circle. And with this plane selected, I'm going to click on cloth. Okay, and now if we press space to play back, you'll see that our cloth is just going to fall straight through that sphere, and that's not what we want. So I'm going to go back to the first frame, shift left click, and now we need to tell Blender that this is a collision object. So I'm going to select my my sphere, and then under physics properties, I'm going to click on collision. All right, and that's going to tell Blender this is a collision object. And now if we press space to play back, you'll see something is happening. Our cloth is kind of just falling on top of our sphere, but it's not really doing anything, and it's not looking like cloth. And that's because we haven't subdivided this plane. So if I select this plane and I go into edit mode, pressing tab on the keyboard, you can see that this plane consists of one big face. And that's not really going to help us because it's not really going to be able to bend that face. So we need to add more faces or more geometry to be able to do that. So in edit mode, with this face selected, I'm going to right click subdivide. And again, right click subdivide, right click subdivide, right click subdivide. Do that a few times, maybe one more, until you have something that's got enough geometry. And then we're going to go out of edit mode. So press tab on the keyboard. And now I'm going to press space to play back. And now you can see we have something that looks a little bit more like cloth. You can still see a lot of blockiness, but that's fine. We can always just add a smooth shade to this. So if I right click and say shade smooth, you can see that is already looking a lot better. Well, obviously I have to add a little bit more geometry to make it nice and smooth, and we will probably just add a subsurface modifier to do that. So let's see how we can create something like a flag. So I'm going to start with a new scene, or I'm just going to delete these two objects. So just drag a box around them, X, and then delete. And first of all, we need to have a flag pole. So I'm going to do Shift A, Mesh, Cylinder. I'm going to scale it down, and then I'm going to scale it in the Z axis. So S and then Z, pull that out, S, Z, pull that out, and then I'm going to move it up slightly. So G, Z, move that up, and that is our flag pole. And now we want to create a plane for our flag. So Shift A, Mesh, Plane, and I'm going to scale that up a little bit, and I'm going to scale it in the Y axis. So SY, just pull it out so we have something that looks a little bit more closer to a flag. And I'm going to move that up. So GZ, move it up to around here. And I want to rotate it around the Y axis. So RY. And then I want to rotate it 90 degrees. So I'm just going to type in 90 and then click. And that's exactly 90 degrees. And now I want to move it just so it's kind of on the edge of this pole. So GY to move it in the Y axis to about there. And then GZ to bring it down to about there. All right, so that's our basic flag. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on this plane, go to our physics tab, and then add a cloth physics properties to that plane. And now if I press space, you'll see that our flag is just going to fall because it's not connected to anything, or we don't have any collisions, etc. So now what we want to do is, if you look in this properties section of this plane under the physics properties, And if you go down, scroll down, you've got all these different settings that you can play with, the tension and the compression and the shear and the bending, all of those things. I'm not going to go through all these properties. You can play with them and see what they do. They will just change the way that your cloth actually interacts and will be generated. So what we're looking for is under shape. If you expand shape, you'll see it's got a pin group. And this is a vertex group that we're going to create to tell Blender that these vertices should be pinned and not be able to move around. So what we're going to do is, I'm just going to zoom in here slightly, and I want to hide this pole for now because I actually want to see the vertices underneath this pole. So with the pole selected, I'm going to press H on the keyboard to hide it. And then I'm going to select my plane and I'm going to go into edit mode, press tab. And then we want to start adding some extra geometry. So I'm going to right click, subdivide, and do that a few times until you have something like that with all these little vertices. So now what I want to do is I want to select all the vertices on this edge right there. Okay. So an easy way to do that is click on one of these side views like X, and that will give you a perfect side view. I'm just going to pan around, zoom in, and then I'm going to draw a box and just make sure that I select those vertices on the edge. And that's going to be where it's going to be pinning or pinned to that flagpole. So with those vertices selected, I'm going to go down to this little upside down triangle. And this is the object data properties. And this is where you can specify vertex groups. So you can see it says vertex group. With those selected, I'm going to click on the plus and it's going to create a new vertex group, and you can always give it a name. I can just double click there and I can call this maybe pin cloth, press enter. And then you want to assign, you need to assign these or this selection to this vertex group. So I'm going to click assign, that assigned it, and now we can just test it and see. If I click on deselect, it will deselect that selection, and with this pin cloth group selected or highlighted, you can now click on select and you'll see that it will automatically select that selection that you saved inside of that vertex group. So we can go deselect and I can go out of edit mode, pressing tab. And now we can go back to our physics properties, and we're going to go scroll down all the way until we get to shape. And then underneath shape, we've got our pin group. And if you click in this empty area, it's going to show you all your vertex groups that you set up. So as you can see, there's the one that we created, pin cloth. I'm going to click on that. And now if I play back, you'll see that we get something like that. So it's actually pinning all those vertices along that edge. So I'm going to stop that, go back to the first frame, and then I want to unhide my flagpole. So to unhide everything is Alt-H, and that's going to unhide it. And now if you play this back, you'll see that our flag is actually going to fall down the way it is supposed to. So let's say you want to add some forces. Maybe you want to add a little bit of a wind force to this. Very, very easy to do. So first of all, Shift A to create something new. And then we're going to go down to force field. And then you'll see you'll have all these force field operators that you can add. So I want to add a simple wind. So you'll see the second one from the top is wind. Click on that. And currently you can see that the wind arrow is pointing upwards. So that's not really what we want. We want the wind to come from left to right. So I'm just going to rotate that on the x-axis. So R and X, and then 90. 90 is actually pointing the other way. So that's not what we want. We want R and then X and then minus 90 and then click. And that's going to rotate it exactly 90 degrees in that direction. And then we can increase the strength, because currently if I play this back, you'll see something is happening, but not really. We need a little bit of stronger wind force. So with this wind force selected under the physics properties, you'll see that we have strength. So currently this is set to 1. I'm going to increase this to about 50. Let's see how that works. So you can see it will change the way that this wind operator looks like. And now we can press play and let's see what happens. So you can see something is happening, but it's definitely not strong enough. So I'm going to go back to the first frame, increase this to about 200. Let's see what happens. So that's a little better. I wonder if we move this up and maybe just move this towards the back so it kinda is in the same area. Let's see if that makes any difference. No, that's not going to make any difference. So it doesn't really matter where in our scene it is. So we're going to increase this even more, maybe 500. You can also play with the flow, maybe increase the flow a little bit, see how that works. And then you can also maybe increase the noise amount, so it's not always exactly the same amount of wind. So maybe let's increase this to like 1,000, and that's looking pretty cool. So now you can right click on your flag, set it to shade smooth, and let's see how that looks. So yeah, that's starting to look pretty cool. So it's obviously always a good idea to add as much geometry to your cloth simulations as possible. So I'm just going to select all these faces, right click subdivide, and let's see how that works. Obviously the more geometry you add, the slower the simulation will be. So you can see there it's caching our simulation. Here at the bottom you can see it's busy caching this blue line. And then that's looking a little bit better. So what you can maybe do is you can rotate this wind so it's not just going all the way perfectly forward, but maybe it blows in a slight angle upwards like that. Let's just move it down, something like that. Let's see how that works. Yeah, so that is looking pretty cool. So obviously once you've cached your simulation, you can scrub through it and you can play it back and see it in real time and see how that works. Every time you change a setting, it's going to start recalculating that simulation from scratch. So that's always just a good idea to let it cache through first, and then you can play it back to preview that simulation. But yeah, as I said, you can select your plane, go into your physics properties, and then change some of these settings and see how that will change the way your cloth interacts with your scene and with the forces, etc. But for now, this is just how you set it up. Really, really simple. And then you can add forces and see how those forces will interact with your cloth in your scene. So that's how easy it is to add cloth simulations in Blender. I'll see you in the next lesson.